2% of the United States is covered in grass. It's been said by some insightful and very forward-thinking people that this may in fact be a serious problem. Because as common as they are, lawns are a very unnatural and honestly a kind of stupid way to use our land. Don't be condescending. Didn't you ever play outside in the grass as a kid? Have some sensitivity and kick a ball for Christ's sake. It's been brought to our attention that this may be a somewhat sensitive issue. We will continue with that in mind. This is something of a documentary, in that it's documenting the current situation with grass, documenting the execution of a mischievous little plan that we've concocted, and documenting the hand-making of a crafty little illustrative tool known as a zine.
That's a small circulation, self-published magazine-like art book, usually made by individuals or small independent groups of people. At least that's what I've been told.
And its purpose is to explain the severity of this self-inflicted predicament, one that we may be running out of time to un-self-inflict. At least that's what I've been told.
This is a story about grass.
Now, when it comes to nice plants, like these, we're not usually in the business of making enemies. But in a situation so drastic measures must be taken.
Guerrilla gardening is the act of growing plants in spaces without the proper legal permission. It's intended for situations where there's a lack of authorization, situations where people have no choice but to take matters into their own hands. It's like guerrilla warfare, except you can do it with your grandma's bingo club, and you don't have to know anything about explosives, and you don't have to give yourself a call sign like Chaos or Viper. But you can if you want to. But before we can get to that, we need to understand the gravity of the situation.
Considering the perspectives of our children and grandchildren and their grandchildren and so on, the degree to which America is made of lawn has created three problems of significant and troublesome proportions. Lawn has been part of the culture for as long as America's existed, but it really took off in the 1950s, when it rode a regrettable wave of suburbanization into the hearts of millions of Americans. But grass lawns were never from here. Grass is the single most widespread cultivated crop in this country, which on the plus side means there's a lot of it that we can attack. In response to the situation, we've developed a three-step plan. It's designed to quietly suffocate any lawn by discreetly replacing it with plants that might as well have superpowers. And for the last 4 months, we've been busy with steps 1 and 2. But step 3 is where the real fun is going to begin.
Step 1 starts with collecting information. That is, information about plants.
Figuring out what lives nearby, and looking specifically for what's native to this region.
It's important to double check what's what, verifying the leaves, the flowers, the smells. And this can all be done by anyone with a phone and access to the internet. We like to use iNaturalist. Then if the plant is native, it goes on the list.
This is a growing list of nearby native plants. Native plants that are the most powerful tool we have against the lawn. It's critically important that none of these are invasive species, or else this entire plan is absolutely fucked. Because, not to put too fine a point on it, native plants are the crab's abs. The bee's knees, if you will. What we really mean by that is native plants are the fucking shit. Life is a runaway lab experiment that started 3.7 billion years ago. Scientists are still working terribly hard to determine if this was a good or bad thing to have happened. And in all that evolutionary time, living things have come to rely on each other. It's not just the rabbit that goes on existing, it's the rabbit's food, the rabbit's predators, the clover, the people, the wind, the water, bugs. Nothing can exist in a vacuum. They exist as communities. And the first thing to understand about lawns is that they stick a big fat piece of aluminum piping in the wheels that power these complex webs of life. In other words, it's a very disruptive affair. These networks of relationships are much too complicated to fully understand, but sometimes you can find examples of them that are pretty simple and pretty beautiful. This is one of the best places to poop in the open air. It is also home to some of the best wildflowers on the planet. And where they live is a horribly intolerable, harsh place to be doing so. At all wasn't already enough of a fuss. To make it work, different species of flowers have evolved to grow in clusters of contrasting colors, attracting more pollinators than they would alone, and thus making survival that much easier for each other and for the insects pollinating them, and making the whole shebang a little bit more beautiful in the meantime. Or take the fig wasp and the fig. Female wasps crawl into a fig to lay their eggs, and then they die. The next generation of males growing up inside the fig will mate with the hatched females, chew a hole in the side of the fig for those females to escape, and then die. And these females will escape covered in fig pollen, off to fly away and crawl into the next fig and pollinate it before they lay their eggs and they too die. The life cycles of the fig and the fig wasp are fully entangled into each other's, and without the other, each would stop existing. You're kind of eating a wasp if you eat a fig, but the crunch is just the seeds. Now, let's talk about that a little more, because it's important to understand what happens when a member of such a tightly weaved relationship stops existing. Once upon a time, there were 10 million monarch butterflies that lived in the western United States. This was once a whole lot of milkweed, but now it's covered in grass, which tends not to be milkweed. That's just a joke. Grass is never milkweed. These monarch butterflies laid their eggs on milkweed, which, after the eggs hatch, becomes the habitat and the food source for all the little monarch butterfly caterpillars on their way to becoming beautiful little butterflies. Because of the use of herbicides to make room for more grass, and there's a lot of grass by this point, much of that milkweed was, as we say in the business, sent to go pick turnips with a stepladder. That is to say, much of that milkweed was wiped out from the western United States. A leg of the chair was kicked out from under the monarchs who needed that specific plant in order to grow and survive and turn into butterflies. And so, as of 2021, there were fewer than 10 million monarchs in the western United States. There were 1,914. But on the bright side, at least now we have 40 million acres of grass for the dog to poop in. That's just a joke. The dog keeps pooping inside. The first main problem of the lawn is that it wipes out the habitat of living things that have been here for a long time, the effects of which can be difficult to predict. Kentucky bluegrass is from Europe. All of the bugs, birds, bees, bears did not evolve with the Kentucky bluegrass in Europe. Lawns don't support wildlife the same way native plants do. The same native plants for which we have a plant. plant, you little piece of... It's time for step 2. Collecting and storing all the local native seeds from step 1. Many of these seeds can't be harvested until particular times of the year. That's why it's not August anymore. That's why it's November now.
Milkweed, for example, spreads its seeds in the fall, when the pods dry up and burst open, and then the seeds get carried by the wind.
The last 3 months have consisted of eating, sleeping, and squeezing milkweed pods.
It's important that seeds get to spread naturally, on the wind and by birds and bugs and such, but a small amount of them are destined for a different fate. Now here, we're fortunate enough to live close to a lot of the right kinds of plants, but you could also easily just get some seed packets that are made for wherever you live. We collected milkweed here, yarrow over here, sunflowers there, and so on. Those seeds will then be treated and stored for step 3.
November also happens to be when this lawn, and others like it, stop getting the intensive care that they were getting all summer. Lawns don't just take up the space of native plants like milkweed, they also use up resources that could be used for things like alleviating severe drought, resolving water conflicts, or making bombs.
MPQ, calling all patrol. Air raid warning. Reporters rush out to relay the news to an anxious world.
That is, if you were DuPont, one of the big producers of synthetic nitrogen in America during World War II.
More than 1 million sing and dance in the streets.
After the end of the war, there was a surplus of said nitrogen, which is one of the main ingredients in
Throughout
fertilizer.
the nation, manufacturing plants have been built to produce nitrogen compounds for use by agriculture.
Fertilizer that could be sold to a white picket fencing, suburbanizing, post-war celebrating population of Americans who were real jazzed about the American dream.
Joy is unconfined.
An American dream that was marketed exceptionally well. It was the holy trinity of wealth and comfort: a shiny new car, modern suburban home, and the pristine green lawn.
The well-fertilized, immaculately manicured rectangle of grass became a status symbol of social responsibility and prosperity. And it seems the idea stuck. Grass takes up 2% of the land in the continental United States. That's more land area than Iowa, Louisiana, Georgia, Michigan. Grass contains something like 60 calories per pound. New York, Alabama, Arkansas. Eating 35 pounds of grass a day is logistically impractical, digestively upsetting, and thus is not recommended. However, if it was a crop worth eating, it would be the single largest irrigated crop in the United States. That much land could hypothetically grow enough food to triple the amount of fruit and vegetables that we're able to grow in the United States today. I'm not gonna eat that. Funnily enough, the lawn actually started as a flex to show that one did not need to grow food on their land. Wealthy European landowners used grass to show that they owned land but could get by just fine without having to farm it. And this display of status is what immigrated to the United States and found its way into the American dream. This display of status uses up 3.3 trillion gallons of water every year and 1.2 billion gallons of gasoline, 10 times more pesticides per acre than farmland. Lawn care equipment is responsible for 5% of U.S. air pollution. The fertilizer used on lawns runs off into our water supply. Okay, come on, let's take it easy on the lawn for a sec. After all, grass is just a remarkably vulnerable monocrop that depletes the soil and makes ecosystems vulnerable everywhere in the face of a growing biodiversity crisis. Now, I wouldn't say any of this if it wasn't well within our power to change. And for that, we have a plan.
Let me show you what's being accomplished.
This hummingbird weighs as much as 2 pennies. Her heart beats 60 times a second. She's consuming 40% of her body weight every day in the form of nectar and insects, and she's getting ready for the trip of a lifetime. Now every year, these cute little birds fly from their summer homes across the Gulf of Mexico to their snazzy little winter hangouts. And over here in Step 2, we've been finding a lot of this flower called scarlet gilia, which has a really special relationship with the hummingbird. The flowers are shaped just like the bird's bills. They're just the right color to stand out to their bird vision. Their nectar is sweet enough to taste good and give the birds energy, but not so that it clogs up their bills, and they have long stamens that leave a little touch of pollen on the birds' cute little foreheads before they go to the next plant. Hummingbirds and scarlet gilia are like locks and keys. They're made for each other, like monarch butterflies and milkweed. However, there are forces out there that seek to exploit and damage these highly specialized relationships. Forces that are responsible for the greatest ecological disaster in North America in recorded history. Forces that are strengthened by the lawn.
This is an invasive species that I've noticed popping up all around the lawn. Invasive, 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 invasive. And in the right context, invasive species aren't necessarily anything bad, but in the wrong context, they're responsible for about 40% of the loss of endangered species in the United States. They reduce diversity by outcompeting native species, by coincidentally being adapted to, say, the amount of sunlight, or they've got all these really sticky little burrs that get stuck to you and you can't get them off.
Others might figure out how to build homes no matter where they are on the planet, and they can ship in food internationally and gradually steamroll everything that lived there before them.
Invasive species are why we have West Nile, and why you can't move firewood, and why all the trees in the mountains are turning brown and poopy.
And the third major problem with the lawn is that it's a monocrop that weakens the systems around it. And by reducing biodiversity and depleting its environment, it creates the perfect conditions for invasive species to establish themselves and to spread. For a small example of an invasive species, consider how easily weeds grow in lawns. It's an uphill battle to keep them from growing, hence the need for spraying and fertilizer. For a bigger example of the power of invasive species, let's consider what was once one of the greatest plants in North America.
The American chestnut once covered 200 million acres of eastern hardwood forest. It's been described as the ideal tree species. It grew great wood. It was majestic. It grew fast. And you could eat the nuts.
And it once made up half of these hardwood forests. But a pathogen from China was introduced on nursery stock sometime in the late 1800s, near New York City. It never met a tree it couldn't kill. It spread 50 miles a year through the chestnut's range. That's 0.006 miles per hour. And within 40 years, 4 billion American chestnut trees were destroyed.
But what's also interesting about the chestnut is that the tree did not go extinct. The blight wiped out the above-ground portion of the trees, but no matter what, it could not kill their root systems. In the soil, there's an abundance of different microbes doing all kinds of magical and important things. And down there, because of so much biodiversity, the fungus blight could not compete. Because of that diversity, the chestnut was kept alive. Though in a pretty shit state, if you ask me. This isn't a chestnut, but it's a good illustration. Regardless, this is a great example of how biodiversity can make an ecosystem resilient. Like in this case, healthy, resilient soil helped keep the root system safe from the blight that tore through the above-ground portion of all the trees. Lawn soil is quite crap compared to soil growing a whole bunch of native plants like these. This soil is microbially diverse, and it stores carbon. And it's exactly what we want to create with step 3. Get off me.
Step 3 is the final step in the plan. This shows the difference between the roots of native plants and a popular lawn choice like Kentucky bluegrass, which is lacking in the downstairs department.
These root systems are habitat, and in fact they're far more habitat than what's created by the plants they anchor above ground. Lawns, because of these little tiny baby roots and things like, lead to more compacted soil. It means that plants have a harder time growing their roots through. It means that water doesn't drain as well, and it means that you're open to more things like flooding. And this actually plays very well into our hands because a common technique used in the lawn care business is creating small holes in the soil to counter the compression. It's little grass turds from the aeration. And since we're also here to create better soil, we're going to help them out by planting some native seeds. It smells like pickles. Gross. Now, if one were to be feeling a little less subtle, there are more assertive measures that can be taken against nearby grass. You can cover it with cardboard, you could use it as fuel for combustion, you could rent a sod cutter, cut it out, flip it over, and call me to help, because I'd love to. This is stupendous. You could dump mulch on it. For legal reasons, we can't necessarily condone some of these. One must be careful not to fly too close to the sun. Be free. Some of these seeds are best planted in the spring, like the sunflowers. So we'll store the rest and save them for the winter. International Sunflower Guerrilla Gardening Day is coming up on May 1st, so if you're interested, do mark your calendar. I'll see you there. Others, like the milkweed, need to cold stratify, where cold temperatures of the fall and winter will actually cause the seeds to germinate and come up in the spring. Just cover them up a little bit, give them a nice little pat down. Ooh, a sprinkler. Go for yourself, buddy. So now is the perfect time to plant them, with all these little holes that were so conveniently dug for us. Planting lots of seeds. Different plants will need different levels of care, but most of them, once they're planted, will grow well in this environment. After all, that is what they did here for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Native plants are the living, breathing alternative to an outdated status symbol. Be free! They build biodiversity, they use far fewer resources, they support healthy ecosystems of which we are very much a part. And they're a polite way to say, put an egg in your shoe and beat it, to a habitat-destroying corporate machine based on the self-obsession of cocky old dead guys whose hair looked like this. Guys to whom we've given 2% of the land area in this country. That's 40 million acres of wildlife habitat and learning opportunities and carbon storage and connection to the land. That's 40 million acres of stuff to make a zine about. Thanks for watching.